Recording starts in 0.
There we go.
All right. Hello and welcome to the first ever episode. Finally kicked it off of the We Are Pivotal podcast. Our first guest, a special dear friend of mine, Dillon Schade, founder of Puppi. How are you, sir? What's going
I'm
on?
great,
Thank you so
Paul.
much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for taking the time. This has been a long time coming, and after all the tech stuff and after all the nonsense, we finally are here. First things I want to do is just welcome you and welcome anyone watching this for the first time to give you a brief overview of what the We Are Pivotal podcast is. It's a podcast that helps founders tell their stories in reality. It really highlights the ups and the downs and the journey of the people behind some of the up and coming tools, softwares, apps, and agencies, whatever it may be, that are being built on the DL while we are all living our wonderful lives. And I'm really excited to talk with you, Dillon, and hear your story and the evolution of Puppi, because I know it's gone through quite an evolution. But before we talk about Puppi the app, let's talk about Dillon the person. I guess to kick things off, tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your childhood, a little bit more about you, from as far back as you can, to kind of give us an overview of what became the founder of this awesome app.
Sure. So again, Paul, thank you for having me. So I guess I would start my story back in New Jersey, where I was raised. I grew up around the Morristown area and about like an hour outside of New York City. So there was always like a little bit of gleam that I've always wanted to go and work in the Big Apple. And I'm the oldest of four, and with a wonderful like single mom who did a phenomenal job raising us. So as the oldest, I was always seen as like the guinea pig, being like the oldest, and then with
Yeah.
a single mother, it kind of forced me to grow up very quickly to kind of try and take that kind of father-esque role. So always trying to lead by example for my younger siblings, and I think that really like formulated my early years and kind of created that the character and personality of being known as like the dad of the group. And whenever I was young, I always loved entrepreneurship. I mean, I remember my mom pushed me to do something outside of like retail because that's what everyone did in my town because there weren't that many jobs. So I started my own landscaping business, so called College Bound Landscaping, and I had hired a bunch of my friends and sent out a whole bunch of flyers, and I would just charge the person $20 an hour for service, and then I would pay them. But my high schoolers $12 an hour, so they were making much more than the minimum wage, and then I was just pocketing the extra $8 here. So it was a really cool first dip of the toe into the entrepreneur lifestyle, and I just fell in love with that kind of that grit. And then I went to school up in SUNY Binghamton, and from there, I got my first experience in like kind of medium scale like management. I was like the president of my university. It was a really cool experience. Like 16,000 kids, ran a bus
Wow.
company. It was a really cool experience to be a part of and to kind of see what it's like to be in that more corporate-esque side of things.
Yeah.
And then after graduation, moved to New York City, worked for Deloitte and Google in doing like cybersecurity. So essentially helping big companies not get hacked. And then from there, I
Where have
realized,
you been all this time? All I'm hearing is about big companies getting hacked these days.
dude, it
So
happens all the
it's
time.
because you left
Deloitte
the
was
industry. Because you know what I
yeah, yeah.
mean?
I mean, there's always going to be jobs for cybersecurity, but the thing with that is when you do a good job, nothing happens. And it got
Yeah.
really boring for me pretty quick. And I remember back to those like college, but like landscaping days, the entrepreneurship, like grind, the hustle that I just wasn't getting in that corporate lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I ended up getting some inspiration. And I don't know how you want to dive in with this podcast, but I can either go into where Puppy came into that, or if you have any other questions before I
Yeah,
dive in.
I did want to step it back a little bit because if I think back, to when entrepreneurship first clicked for me. I've always had a dream of sort of being an independent something, and it was
Mm.
formulated over time. And I haven't really, interestingly enough, I haven't really thought back far enough to think about what that moment was for me when I said, this is what I need to pursue
Yeah.
or I'm going to die. Because, that's kind of what level I feel like we have to get to some degree. And people don't believe it, but you really have to risk so much if you come from a place where you haven't really had someone really holding your hand and guiding you, which is most of us. So going back to the landscaping business, which I didn't really know about, super interesting. I'm actually learning all this about you now.
Yeah, in real time.
What was the spark? How did you find out this information? Who guided you? How did you maneuver this? Was this something that you felt like you had a knack for and you just kind of figured it out on your own? Did you blueprint something? Like that was like a first taste, because you could have taken that way further, but you went corporate. So how did you find out? And then why not continue that path and blow this thing out, and by now have this insane, massive nationwide landscaping business, employing college students? I mean, that's what my curiosity's piqued.
Yeah, great question. So where the idea stemmed from to go into landscaping was, I didn't know the term at the time, but arbitrage.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, in my town, you have these mega landscaping companies who were charging outrageous rates for, I mean, good work, but I just know there was such a workforce that wasn't being properly utilized in our small town of Long Valley, New Jersey, where there are more deer than people. And
Hmm.
all these high schoolers are itching for jobs that would pay them more than the 7.25 minimum wage or whatever it was back then. And I always did landscaping for myself and for our house as a high schooler. And then my neighbors were like, "Hey, we pay you $20 to mow our lawn?" And I was like, 20,
Mm-hmm.
$20 to mow your lawn? You kidding me? Meanwhile, at the same time, I was working over at Hollister, standing outside of the door, getting paid like bare nothing
Nothing.
for
Yeah, like
retail.
$7, whatever it
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
So to go from those hours of work to my neighbor paying me $20 to mow a lawn, I was like, wait, this only took me an hour. I was like, I'm
Mm.
making over double what I would over before. This is great. And
Mm-hmm.
then I realized, wow, this really wasn't that hard either. It's super easy to train people how to mow lawns, to throw mulch, to plant. So the barrier to entry, like to educate the workforce, was super low. So I can get any of my high school buddies to do it.
Right.
And,
I'm sure you weren't thinking about it in terms of educating your workforce at the time.
well,
You were probably doing it on your own and like
well, wait, I was, yeah,
wanted to work with
exactly.
your friends. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
Well,
talk
so
more about that. Yeah.
my friends didn't come until later. Actually, it was more of like a
Mhm.
preserving the quality, because I didn't really know these terms at the time. But I was like,
Mm.
I liked the going into a project and then having like the before and after pictures were so rewarding. Going in and
Mm.
having like an unmulched, like decrepit trees and like the shaggy lawns, and then being able to have the after picture, it was so rewarding to have that comparison. Like, oh, I did that. Like having the
Yeah.
ability to say I
Yeah.
did that, and then just seeing how thankful the homeowners were. It was like the perfect combo. And then I learned, I won't say any names, but by hiring a friend real quick, they did a terrible job, and it wasn't what I was expecting or what I was. So I was like, oh my gosh, I need to like make sure this person does it almost as well, or if not better than me, because
Mhm.
if not, then I can't have them representing me going off, because that now I have to deal with the angry homeowner who like had their plants destroyed because they didn't know like what was a weed, what was a plant. So that's when I
The
learned, like,
early signs of delegation and
oh yeah, yeah, I
hiring the
learned that
wrong and the right
really quick in
people. Yeah.
landscaping. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I
Okay.
realized it really wasn't that hard to teach people those kind of basics. And we actually stayed in like the lower barrier to entry kind of landscaping projects. We weren't trying to do like landscape design or anything that was too intensive, or
Hmm.
planting larger trees. We kind of knew where we were great at and where like we kind of fit in. And then we just kind of flooded the market with high schoolers to do that kind of low barrier work. And then the homeowners felt great because they were now paying somebody who was college bound. That was called college bound landscaping. So
Mm-hmm.
they felt like they were giving back to their community, or like to like the young entrepreneurs in their town. So
Right.
it was just a win-win. So then why did I not bring it nationwide or start kind of blowing this thing up? Well, I kind of tried to at one
Oh, you
point,
did. Okay.
but I was tried to. I tried
Yeah.
to, but I didn't know of how else to kind of expand. Like landscaping in general is like a really hard business or industry to like expand outward and have a whole bunch of them. That's why you see like
Okay.
every town has different landscaping companies.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons for that kind of struggle, but one that I was coming up with was I just didn't have like I always thought of like, oh, maybe there can be like some kind of app that people would hire these high schoolers for, and they would just like the high schoolers would be independent contractors, kind of like you can hire a high school like a Thumbtack or any of those apps.
Yeah. Yep. 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 Mm-hmm.
So that was my initial approach, and then I realized I couldn't build an app because I didn't know how. So that squished that real quick,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
then I just went to college, and then once I went to college, then it was just close to impossible to do both. So I kind
Yeah,
of had to make a choice.
you had to make a choice. Either you were going to go,
Yeah.
yeah, and you kind of, because you didn't have that skill set of at the time of building an app, because you really that's the path you saw to scaling, and
Hmm.
you didn't know it was scaling at the time, but you were a high schooler, you had made some money, and you took whatever you did, and then you took that experience to school. What you really seems like you've talked about here is, you've kind of figured out a product market fit, you've built an MVP, figured out a recruiting and staffing strategy, and you implemented it you executed on that strategy, delegating your work, taking a fraction of the revenue of the workforce, and being able to scale and delegate your business. I find it fascinating that someone able to do that in high school, and now we find founders later on having so much trouble with these specific things. But it feels like it was not really that hard for you to do, and I feel like we because you had nothing to lose, because you didn't learn the imposter syndrome yet, right? You didn't
Yep.
learn those things yet, I feel like. Or am I right? Like you weren't scared to do it, you were just kind of trying stuff out and seeing what worked.
Oh yeah, because
And
I knew at the end of the day, like I wasn't paying for the house I lived in. I didn't have any kids. I know those like adult responsibilities. Yeah, I'm just a high schooler. So for me, it was very low risk. If anything, it was more risky to just waste all my time standing outside of Hollister, where I'm just
yeah.
wasting my weekends or wasting my time. So for me, the opportunity cost was so low to get into
Hmm.
it, as opposed to now as an adult, where the opportunity cost is so high. I mean, I don't have
Right.
family or
Right.
kids or anything yet, but still, you have your
I mean, you have a life. You
responsibilities.
have to
Yeah,
support a life. You
exactly.
have relationships. You have a house. You have an apartment. Whatever. You have life
Yeah.
to have. You have to support. Really interesting. When you think about, and now we'll talk about Puppy right after this, because I think as we start to talk about Puppy, a lot of this stuff will start to surface. But I think when you talk about opportunity cost, I think it's still relative, because had you realized the opportunity cost of going to someone at that time and saying, "Hey, mom, dad, if we build this app, we'll be rich," right? If we find a way, like, you just didn't have the outlet at that time, and then the layers of life sort of beat you down a little bit, and kind of, you went through your own corporate process. You kind of, you segued into a different area.
Hmm.
I just find that process, so pivotal in early stage, but then we sort of lose it later on, because even though there is a greater opportunity cost later on, isn't there also a greater reward later on, because we have all this experience and all these extra abilities, but yet we're less willing to take the risk,
I couldn't agree more.
later on, right? Why do you
Yeah.
think that is for you? Like, if you can go back, would you have done it that way? Would you have attempted it had you had the right plug, and gone that route?
Yeah.
Thinking about it?
Given the hindsight, I
Yeah.
always knew college for me was going to be a waste of time.
Yeah.
And I say
Okay.
waste of
Interesting.
time because I just saw the extracurricular credits and all this stuff that knew I wasn't going to use in the industry. So for me, and I also saw the tech that they were teaching because I was an engineer, but then I saw how dated it was compared to what people are actually using for tech industry. And I was like, I'm not going to use any of this. But
Right.
it's just the process that I believe it was just old knowledge that was passed down, but things were changing so quickly
Hmm.
that even though in the best intent from family and friends and like other like mentors at
Yep.
the time to take the more stable route, I didn't have that mentor push to keep up that track. If anything, it was go to college, like get a really good job, and you don't need to go to college for business was what I was being told all the time. But if go for like engineering or a science, something you really can't learn on your own, and then that was kind of like the founded wisdom that kind of pushed me in that direction. But I I won't lie, I thank God there was no attendance policy. Thank
Right. No, that's all of us, man.
because oh my
Everybody I
God,
talk to, I'm telling you. Yeah.
it was terrible. I mean, I would just submit my homework online, and I would
Yeah.
especially whenever I was like in charge of like the university student body, I would have kids go to
Yeah.
class for me because I just couldn't waste my time and like in some class that I knew wasn't going to benefit me in the long term. Meanwhile, I had to run a bus company with 100 kids that I was employing. So I was like,
Yeah.
the priorities were just so off at the time. So it was interesting though, like going to college and then finding the student government that kind of allowed me to like foster that kind of entrepreneur spirit in there. Like I guess there was
Mm.
always that kind of draw to it. Like even
Yeah.
in like a big system like the student body, like the essay, what we called it, there were
Yep.
still so many ways to be like an entrepreneur to like innovate inside of the essay and create like new systems, new projects, new initiatives.
Yeah.
So still being able to eventually pretty much leverage the $5 million operating budget that we had each year to then do
Mm.
these really cool, innovative uh, things that I wouldn't have been able to do on my own. So so looking back in hindsight, I'm really happy to have had that experience because at an
Hmm.
early age, it allowed me to. I just say just get elected, but I didn't have to start a business to then get the $5 million operating budget. I just got elected, and then I got that route and that ability to kind of have that play with to.
Yeah. You were exposed to being able to manage that money. You were exposed to being able to
Mhm,
operate, and and
exactly.
and that operating really helped you down the line as we talk about Puppy and the ups and downs there. I did want to recognize something very cyclical that I've noticed as you were telling your story is that it seems like then the classes and the attendance really became your next iteration of Hollister, because you were then going, why am I going to waste my time at Hollister, aka my class, when
Yep.
I can just go and get the submit my homework and then go operate my next version of my business, which is 1,000 kids, the bus, the $5 million operating, and whatever it is. So
Yeah.
you were kind of always, it was always this kind of balance for you, hasn't it been? Is that, do you feel like that you were aware of that at that time, or was this something that was intuitive for you? Like, because I feel like a lot of entrepreneurship is really that intuition. Talk to me a little bit about how that connects for you, if at all, as we surface it.
It's really interesting how you pulled that out, and you're definitely right. There is that cyclical fashion of like I know where I want to go,
Yeah.
but it seems like there was a part of life that because of the either my upbringing, aka the Hollister, and like that was a job in the area, or going to
Hmm.
college and then having to go to class. There's always that
Yep.
something that felt like a weight bringing you down. At least for me, it was.
Mm.
Like I always
Right.
felt like there was something that like took up some of my time that I would have much rather have done something else with. But because of external circumstances, because of the events leading up to where it got me there in college, so I had to take these
Hmm.
classes. It Yeah, that's really interesting. There always has seemed to have been something anchoring, and then my instinct is to just cut it. Like it is, it's
Yeah.
if I'm not passionate in something, if I don't
Yeah.
like what I'm doing, I will detract very quickly.
Yeah.
I just know what I like, and I know what I love, and I know what I don't like.
Yeah.
So like any kind of repetitive tasks or things that are I don't see value add and are more just
Yeah.
like wasting my time, I want to get out of there as quickly as possible. And that's how I felt like
Yeah.
a lot of my college classes were.
Yeah, the college classes are sort of a symbol of taking a risk because whenever you don't attend the class, you're taking a risk. Whenever you submit an assignment, you may have missed something. It's all of that. And again, so often as we are building into the founders and entrepreneurs that we are, we see these patterns, and I'm noticing them as I interview more and more people pre-podcast, that we are willing to take these risks and not do the typical things that most people will do, because there's a ton of people that are like that are afraid not to go to the class, that are afraid to reject the standard norms, and then
Yes.
and you see that very surface, you see that surface more frequently, excuse me, when you look at all the founders that we know of these unicorns. Oh, he quit Harvard, she quit Harvard, da 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 da, to go and pursue blah blah blah. And you see that people rejecting the schooling system in pursuit of their own greatness. And it's so interesting because it doesn't get surfaced enough for us as founders that, well, not yet, right? We don't have that
Yeah, yeah,
unicorn or whatever, right? Like
yeah.
we're not in the
Give
news
it
just
time,
yet.
but I know where you're going.
Yeah, right. We know where I'm going, but it's wonderful to surface that and to see that. And I think that if more founders saw that in themselves, and I think you'd agree, they'll notice how they throughout their life have gone through these cycles where they've rejected certain things and have taken these risks and have conditioned themselves to then ultimately later on take the biggest plunge, which is what we're about to get to with your story,
Hmm.
into entrepreneurship. Because had you not done the college bound landscaping and kind of understood that and seen the risks of hiring the wrong people and what you need to do to fix it, and then going to college because it was the thing to do, but then rejecting going to class and focusing still on the things you knew. It's this intuition that you carry when you sort of know that you want to be, even maybe not consciously but subconsciously, an entrepreneur. So as you were going through college and you continue to tell your story, are you now, as you are going through school, finishing this up, where is your head? Are you aware like, hey, I'm going to be a founder, I'm going to do something, or are we still like, all right, now I'm going to go corporate and figure out how I'm going to carve my niche in entrepreneurship? Because you said you went into security and you did go corporate. Tell
Yep.
me about your thought process there and how you were able to get out of that and pivot into back into being a founder. And how, what was that spark for you, if any? Anything you could tell me about your thought process there would be fascinating.
Yeah, sure. So, and to go back a little bit about the
Yeah.
rejecting of the status quo.
Yeah.
So, it was definitely a rejection, but I wouldn't say it was so rash to be just constantly rejecting the quo, but always questioning. It's just always like,
Question.
why is this the way it is? And if I couldn't justify to myself that the status quo was the best thing for me, then I was quick to reject. So it's always asking
Mm-hmm.
us like, what? Okay, why am I spending an hour here if if the guy's just reading off the PowerPoint and I have the PowerPoint in my Blackboard account, why am I here? If I have like a good GPA, I want to say I got a 3.6 GPA, so I wasn't skipping class and just not attending or anything. I was fine, but if everything is checking out, then why am I giving so much of my time when I can go and teach myself on my own for half the time? So it was definitely a questioning of the status quo, and then once I realized what was best for me, rejecting the status quo. And
Okay.
now, so now to go into post college. So I got a great job out of college with Deloitte and Touche in cybersecurity in a field that I knew nothing about, but they were
Hmm.
hiring a bunch of people. And I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know Deloitte was such a well established, well coveted company to work for at the time.
Right. Hmm.
To me, I was completely like novice to that idea. I didn't attend any like the financial like the conferences. So I didn't know about the big four. I didn't know that. I just sent in a random application, and because of my experience in like running the student government, and they were looking for people who were able to talk to a room, and they're looking for certain
Right.
personalities, and
Yep.
then they'll teach you about cybersecurity because it was so ever changing that they were going to teach you all of that at the job. So they just hired for the person and will teach you cybersecurity later. So with that
Hmm.
mindset, that's kind of how I got in there. And then after doing that for about year and a half, 2 years, I realized that it wasn't for me. In specific, like a key epiphany point for that was here I am, like almost probably 2 years in. At this point, I'm actually a consultant for Google and Deloitte, and I'm at the Google office in the Chelsea Market, New York area. And
Hmm.
my manager leaves the project for about a week or two, and that put me in charge of the project.
Right. You
So
were in charge of the whole project. Yeah. Hmm.
here I am, a consultant at the time, not even a senior consultant, and I only got the Google gig because I didn't put my title in my application for it. So
Oh,
they
wow.
just judged
Was that
me
an
based on
accident? Was
no, no,
that?
that was by design because I knew they're gonna
Oh,
judge me based
nice.
on, like, my seniority, so I just left that out,
Nice.
and then I got in, and then,
Nice.
like, like, 6 months into the project, they were like, "Wait a second, you're not a." Oh, so they didn't know I was a senior consultant or manager till well in, but anyways, um, here I am now, a consultant running the project,
Hmm.
and I would say unbiasedly, it went so smoothly, and it just felt natural because it kind of brought me back to like the SA days, like the more like the client side running the meetings. Like I felt very comfortable in there instead of like being in an Excel spreadsheet all day.
Hmm.
And then my manager came back, and then I got pushed back into the Excel spreadsheet. And I was like, wait a second, this guy's like in his like almost 40. I'm gonna have to wait this long to do a job, but I've
Right.
already been doing. I was like, I cannot see myself doing this for another 20 years because that 20 years is going to go by really quickly if you let somebody
Yep.
take your time like that. And for
Yeah.
me, like getting pushed back down to that Excel spreadsheet and then realizing the time horizon to get to the job that I already knew I was qualified for, which is like the in person side of it, I just knew I had to go. And
Yeah.
around that same time, I came back from a business trip and my apartment in New York City, and I see this. I think it was a Rover walker who was walking a few dogs, and it was Rover Wagger independent, but regardless. And I
Hmm.
was like, dang, like I miss having a dog so much. So like whenever I was a
Hmm.
kid, like dogs have always been a huge part of my life. I had a golden doodle who was really pivotal in like helping my family go through the time of like not having a father. So like the dog kind of like was that filled that vacuum, filled that void, and we put all that
Wow.
love into Buddy. And yeah, he's a huge like part of like he was like a pivotal cornerstone of our family. And
Hmm.
I always put a huge weight on just the value that a dog can bring to people's lives. And
Right.
I also in high school raced seeing eye dogs. So we
Hmm.
so I did the first dog. Her name was Leslie. I got her when she was an 8-week-old puppy, and then I
Hmm.
would teach her for two. I pretty much trained her for like a year and a half, about
Hmm.
a year and a half of training her to what it's like to be like a blind person, to be like how like tethering her to your bed at night,
Wow.
to go to the bathroom on command, like all these things. Like also I got the little bandana so I can put the bandana on her and take her anywhere I wanted to. So like take her to the mall, football games. Like it
Yeah.
was
Good
really
stuff.
cool to have
Good
a little
stuff.
German Shepherd puppy. It's like a single high schooler too. So like that wasn't bad.
Yes. Yes.
And so dogs have always been a big part of my life. When I moved to New York City, I was never able to actually own one because I was traveling too much, working too much, and it wouldn't have been the responsible thing to do
Yeah.
for that dog. So I tried to volunteer at an animal shelter, and there was like a 6-month wait list in the shelter I wanted to go to.
Yep.
And I mean, like, great for the animal shelter, like that they have that many volunteers. And I guess that's just the New York City lifestyle, how dense it is. But I was like, I just want to hang out with the dog for the weekend. I don't want to get paid for it. I want to just enjoy the companionship and love that I felt whenever I was in high school again, when it fits my lifestyle. And there was, I couldn't find any way to do it. So I tried to volunteer at the animal shelter. I eventually got in, but I was thinking, wow, there has to be a way for people to just enjoy the love and companionship of a dog when it fits their lifestyle. And meanwhile, these dog owners are paying so much money in dog sitting, boarding, and those services that I was like,
I
there
know I'm
has,
one of them.
yeah, yeah, especially with both of them too.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I
They'll
was like,
get
well,
you with the double
the
trouble. Oh
double
yeah.
whammy, yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
You can't put them in one crate. So here I am thinking, wow. So you have people like me who I
Hmm.
don't think I'm the only one who wants to have a dog but can't. And now you have people who are paying way too much for dog care or can't find quality dog care, and or hey, bugging their family or people who are close by, like, hey, can you watch like Watson and Sherlock for a week? I need to go
Yeah.
to this trip.
Yeah.
And I was like, there has to be a way to connect these two people together. And that's where the idea of Puppi came from. It was
Hmm.
pretty much making the world a happier place by spreading the love of dogs. So we connect
Hmm.
dog owners with people like myself who love dogs, but don't have a lifestyle to own one, for free playdates. So
Hmm.
that is like the general premise of how that came up. And once I had the idea and I couldn't find anything else like it, I was like, okay. I talked to my manager at Deloitte and I was like, hey man, like I really want to pursue this. And he said essentially, okay, do it. And if you ever want to come back, let us know. But like, you should go pursue it. So, not that I needed that approval to like go off, but it was nice to have that safety net before going, that like, hey, like, if this doesn't work, because most startups don't, I can go back to like a great job and then do that until I have the next idea, or in that process, I find something else I love to do instead.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Let's talk a little bit more about that
Sure.
because, you're at a stage in your story that I think a lot of people come to a crossroads. I remember my conversation with my boss wasn't as amicable when um, my first idea for a startup was called Lunge. It was an app that was supposed to be an on-demand in-home trainer on demand. This is like pre Uber getting big. This is pre
Okay.
on demand anything going big. So we're talking almost a decade ago, maybe maybe a little more. And so when I came to my manager and I said, "Hey, I got in because I got accepted to this FICO or Founders Institute, they called it. I took a test, I paid some money. My aptitude test said, "Oh, you might have something," And so then I gave them my idea, and the idea was I had to leave New York and move to DC, and to be part of this cohort because
Hmm.
that's what it takes to be part of. It was an incubator kind of
Okay.
either an accelerator, incubator, one of the two. We could talk about that separately. But at the end of the day, I came to my manager and I said, "Hey, I got into this thing and I still want to work because it's just nights. It's not even going to take,
Mm.
I just and at the time." Silly enough, remote work was, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Remote? No,
Yeah.
we want everybody in the office. You're a sales guy. We need to be in the pit. All this nonsense that literally means nothing today. It's so ironic, right?
Yep.
You think back because you look at the infrastructure and the standards of corporate and society, and you realize that we control it, not them. We do, but I digress. So he told me to he says either choose this and quit or you stay because we need, and the way that he put it was very elegantly. He said, our team works in the office every day. So you choose what you want to do. And I had to make a hard choice to quit anyway, because the value of time,
Hmm.
which we'll get to in a second, because you talk a lot about your value of time, and I love that point, because I think what happens as we get older is our value of time against us goes up, and our own personal value of time goes down. And so eventually we're so controlled by the time it takes to do everything that doesn't serve us that we don't even have enough time for ourselves. So I think
Yep.
we're going to talk a little bit of philosophy at the end here as you tell us
Love that.
about Puppi. But you had that blessing because you were honest about what you wanted to do, and I was honest about what I wanted to do. What would you have done if they said you're an idiot and you're nuts for doing this, and the doors are slammed shut and you could kiss Deloitte goodbye?
Yeah,
What would
yeah.
and I know it's easy to say now, but
It's
but
easy in
be
hindsight,
honest.
but it's a good question.
Yes, yes. What would you say? Because when I did it, I was so effing scared. By the way, they canceled the cohort anyway, so I moved to DC for nothing because
Are you
there wasn't enough.
Wait, what?
Yes,
They
so
give
it
like a
was,
heads up, like, hey
and
guys, like,
I moved. It was supposed to start in October, right after my birthday, week after my birthday it was supposed to start. So I get there, I move into a den with no door. My door was just two. I mean, I have my own story, but my door was just like just a little cover. And I get this email and it's done. And so I had to scramble for a new job and the whole thing. So that, I started working for a startup, and then that was just like right pre my first company, but my first agency. But it was this point where I had gotten dissed, and then it meant nothing. And I was just like, ah. And so I wonder with you, if they said no, would you still have done it? Really?
yeah, I would have had to done it
Yeah.
for my mental sanity. I
Yeah.
remember sitting like, okay, here I am, like in the Google office.
Yeah.
Like my desk is like right next to the cafeteria. You get like the steaks every day. You get the flat. You get all your. Got like a flat white coffee. I had like the quote unquote life. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I was so miserable. You
Yeah.
couldn't pay me enough money to do something that I don't want to do. And I think that's also like a cyclical thing that you'll notice in my stories. Like if I don't like doing something, or if I see my time as not being well spent somewhere or being valued, I'm very quick to drop it. And even at these like prestigious name logo companies, you can still find yourself in those situations. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember just like I was listening to a lot of Linkin Park. I was listening to a lot of these like the emo style high school music, and I was like, wow, like I really need to like get out of this quick.
Yeah. You
And
started to realize,
yeah, I was like, uh oh, I need to.
Yeah.
So I knew regardless, I was gonna have to make that move.
Yeah.
Even if he said no, if you leave, you're done for good. I do think I always knew that it's a big world out there.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I did pride myself in at the time with Deloitte was keeping a good relationship and rapport with my superiors and my peers as people, not just in work.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came to these more human decisions, like leaving a job, like yeah, it can be very corporate, but there's like a human on the other side of it. So
Mm-hmm.
when I did make those approaches and have those conversations, it was more from like the human side than it was from like a business decision side. And like I know with those big companies too, I think it's like 220,000 employees at that company. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a number to them. Let's be real here.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
like
Yeah. You
seeing
are. But
success at that company. I mean, first off, I'll say like I had an amazing experience with them. If corporate was the way I wanted to go. So
sure. Yep.
I don't want to diss them as a corporate entity because if that
Oh
was my
no. No.
path, I was in the perfect spot. But just
Mm-hmm.
for me, it wasn't right. It felt like I was getting a red solo cup, or they were giving me a red solo cup, and they were
Yep.
telling me to fill up the ocean with water. And you can
Yeah.
see the level of success that you're providing by
Yeah.
watching the ocean level rise. And I just couldn't see any rising tide. So for me, I was like, I just got to go.
Got
So
it. No, that makes sense.
yeah.
The question this brings up, and I think a lot of people, and this is why I love this point in the conversation, because think about how many people will see this and not enjoy what they're doing, right? They hate
Mhm.
their job. They feel stuck. They're trapped, and maybe they don't have exactly the relationship that you might. Um, you've made some good recommendations. I'll reiterate a few. First of all, be honest with your leadership and with your managers about what you want to pursue, right? Because you approach them right away about this,
Yeah.
right? So if there's somebody watching going, I want to pursue ABC, right? You want to tell them that this is what you want to do. The questions I have are, how far did you take your idea before you told them, number one? Number two, how did you decide whether you're going to have enough money or not? Like, how did you decide the financial part of it? Because you're about to cut off everything and you have
Yeah.
no idea what you're really doing. So the money part is a big deal for many people when they're first starting off.
Hmm.
And then three, when you did decide that you were going to pursue this, why not do both? Like, why did you feel like you needed to dedicate everything to it? And it's really this three-part decision making process I think most people go through. It's like that why can't I
Hmm.
just do both? So tell me a little bit about that. What was going on through your head?
Sure. So the point in which I was confident enough and I felt like it was real enough to tell them
Hmm.
was like, so I had a friend at the time who was, we pretty much knew was going to be my co-founder for this, who was also unhappy in his pursuits.
Okay.
Um, we pretty much brought it to a point where we were like in at the Figma did not exist at this time. We were like using, and I didn't come from a app design development background, but I just knew the general features. I knew apps that I liked. I was using Google Drawing. I don't know if everyone's ever used it before, but
I've never even heard of it.
it's not meant for app design. And here I am.
Yeah,
I can go to my drive right now and I have all of those Google drawings of like what the apps might look like, what the logo might look
cool.
like. There was a bunch of that, like in the beginning when it's your first time like trying to start a company like this, and if you're a first time entrepreneur, like don't get stuck in the vanity stuff. Don't get stuck in like
Yeah,
spending so much time on the name, so much time on the logo, on all these things that in reality like don't mean anything. They're really
yeah,
not bringing value to you. And we
yeah,
got stuck in that for a while, but I think once, and by a while I'll be more specific, probably a few months of the vanity stuff that was more of like daydreaming. It was really cool to kind of see a logo and a name and get
yeah,
some ideas to what features there'd be. So like no harm, no foul there. And maybe hire a Fiverr person every once in a while to see if they can spin some stuff up.
yeah. Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Yep, of course.
And then I think once it got to the point where I felt like I was ready to hire a development team in which we didn't know like where we were going to hire yet first, because we knew like
Yep.
as a founding team, neither me or my co-founder at the time had the experience to one design an app well or
Mhm.
develop an app well.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we were going to entrust a agency to do that for us. Mistake number one. From
And
listening
we're
to,
going to talk about that because
yeah.
I know from our pre-talk that that didn't work out for you. So I definitely want to do that. I definitely want to dig into that. But continue.
Yeah, did
Yes.
not work out really at all, and I also had no idea how much the stuff was gonna cost yet, so
Right. That's another thing. Right.
had no idea. So started first, I went down the rabbit hole of research of, okay, could we build this ourselves? What kind of like low code tools are out there at the time? And actually, fun fact, Bubble, which is like what I currently develop on, was in its infancy stages, in its bootstrapping stages. So here I am, actually was an early adopter for Bubble, building the first iteration of Puppi, and then realized that I just didn't have the skill sets able to do it yet. So we started
Mm,
interviewing some development firms based all over the world, some in India, some in Ukraine, some in the US. Realized the US is way too expensive. And we didn't have angels. We don't come from families with a lot of money. So family and friend rounds like doesn't really
right.
move the needle at all in that direction. And once I started getting quotes from like the India and Ukraine markets, I was like, okay, well, actually, I could probably self-fund this thing. And even with the money saved up from both of us and a little bit of money from family and friends.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so then once we got to that point where like the agencies were interviewed, we had the final one that we were like really confident with. That's when I approached my manager and said like, hey man, like this is something I really want to pursue. So
Okay, so you had somebody you were about to choose, and
essentially,
that's when you. Okay,
yeah.
right. Okay.
And there was something that I don't know if this is unique to a Big Four type consulting
Yep.
opportunity, but I was terrified to do work outside of business hours because between like the partitioned phones and they're like just the horror stories of like what you do on our time is like hours, and then like
Mm-hmm.
when you're working these like crazy hours, what's technically your hours and theirs. So and because you're working like late nights too with them, sometimes you're like
Yep.
I just was so terrified that what if this work I'm putting in is eventually going to get scooped up from under me because it's technically on their
On
time.
their dime, on their time, on their
Yeah,
time, on their dime. Right. Okay,
yeah.
makes total sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
So
you kind of had to do it because you needed to disconnect yourself so that you can be sure that you own all of the assets and everything that you were working on. Okay,
and that was a little
got it.
bit for peace of mind too. That wasn't like in hindsight, I would have it would be worth the money to consult with a lawyer about that too, to go through your
Mm-hmm.
contract, what you have with the company. So for me, I didn't, and for me it was just a peace of mind. Also, I knew I just wasn't going to be doing that job for long, just for my personal
Yeah.
sanity, anyways.
Yep.
Um, so in a way, maybe I just convinced myself to make that leap because of a few of these factors,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of like once all those ducks were in a row, that's when kind of made the leap to do that, to hire the development team, like say goodbye to Deloitte for a bit, for what I thought was going to be maybe a bit, who knows, but just like bye
Yeah.
for
Bye for now. Yeah.
like next chapter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the way I saw it. It was just like the going on to a next chapter, going back into that entrepreneur, figure it out, great lifestyle.
Yep.
And but meanwhile still living in New York City. So like not spending too much money because it's not cheap to do this and be in New York.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but then so we hire this development team in India, and I
Yep.
swear to you, it was just a year and a half of
Mm-hmm.
just the late night 3 a.m. phone calls because of the time difference,
Oh yeah, I know. I've worked in the
and
with the
just
international.
we had a terrible experience, like absolutely
Yeah.
terrible experience. And it's not fully the development team's fault. It's
Right.
also partially our fault too. Like just looking back on like what that experience was,
Mm-hmm.
because that it being our first iteration, our first attempt at building an app, ideas are really easy, but actually
Yeah.
executing on them is so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And saying I love, I feel like it's just a broken record at this point, is to simplify is complicated, but to complicate is simple. And it's
Mm-hmm.
so true once you really start to like, you start from a blank canvas and say, okay, make Puppi. Like you have this cool
Yep.
idea. Okay, actually make it now.
Yep.
And I knew I had a design eye. And so anytime the India team would send something back, and there would be like the padding would be off and the fonts were a little different, and I was like, guys, like this just like looks bad.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so we entrusted them and their expertise to help out in this aspect, and then I realized that I was doing a lot of the work for them, not by choice, but because like I made a huge risk doing this,
Right.
so I had to make it work. There was, I just said there was no plan B because I could have gone back, but in my mindset I was like, my friends, my family, like all like just like you tell everybody
There's
you're doing
so
this
much
thing.
writing on it. Yeah.
There's so much
Yeah.
riding on this, and then to have the team send something back that just looks like a child did it, I was like,
Yeah.
this is not good.
Yeah.
Um, and then so we did that for about a year and a half before eventually shutting it down, and just like saying like, hey, like sorry, like next, like we just need to kind of move on and like cut our losses. And
Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
a year and a half, too long, but also it was my first experience like going through this process, and it was a
Mm-hmm.
lot to finally make that cut. to like
I'm sure
to close that door. Also,
that
like
door. Yeah.
at that point, I had like no money, like the savings gone.
You
Um,
burned through a bunch of stuff with that, with
oh my
working the back
gosh,
and
like
front, all the revisions, all the iterations. Okay.
exactly. Oh yeah, I remember just like going to the bank and like I was a pro at like international wire transfers, and just praying that it would help. And it's something that you shouldn't be a pro in. It's it really we did a
Yeah,
few times. Like yeah, if you're a pro at it, there's a problem.
yeah.
And so eventually shut that down, and
Okay.
at least that V1 version of it down.
Interesting.
And and
Let's take a step.
sure,
Let's
yeah, go
pause
for it.
for a second because I
Yeah,
think the questions are. I'm starting to think about what anyone watching will start to think, and they say, okay, well, what I've learned is don't build the whole thing. Build an MVP and
mhm,
only have enough. And this, and again, this is all right now it's a different world, right?
yeah,
Bubble is woof, and no code is everywhere, and so it's a different world
yes,
we're building in. But back then, if you were to give any advice from your learnings that could be hyper specific, right? You were saying it's easy to complicate.
hmm
What would you say you have complicated? What would you say you could have held back on having to develop? If you had to go back in time, how would you have made it? How could you have made a better decision? How could you have made it work? What can we talk to somebody if somebody's watching this going, I'm about to find an agency overseas because that's where my budget is.
yeah,
What is their strategy? What can we give them that's super valuable from your
sure. So
experience?
from my experience, we were like I can say anecdotally overly ambitious with the platforms, like the operating systems we wanted to have our app on. We wanted to
Mm-hmm.
be on both iOS and Android. But the novice in me didn't realize at the time, or at least understand what that meant. And what that meant was you're making two apps. You're making two
Mm-hmm.
apps that just look the same. So when you make a
Mm-hmm.
change in one app, you're paying for the same amount of time for a developer to make it in another one. So you just doubled your cost there. And this is obviously before React Native. This is before Flutter, before Bubble, before these things. So you were coding like in JavaScript and Swift, were like our two.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if I can go back, I would say pick one that matches your demographic the best.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have enough users. If you're in the US, it's probably going to be iOS,
Mm-hmm.
and build it there first. Iterate up as much as possible on that one, and then once you find that market fit, then and you stop doing constant iterations on it, then bring the new one up to speed and start that instead of like starting them both down here and slowly chipping away at the same time was just horrible because then you're not only just debugging one app, you're debugging another app that might function that might have bugs in it that the other app doesn't
I
because there's
see.
different
Yeah.
developers. But
Interesting.
now we don't have as much of that issue because
Mm-hmm.
of frameworks like Flutter and React Native. So I would say if you are looking to hire abroad or hire an agency or just develop it yourself, I'd highly consider using one of those frameworks so you're not managing two code bases. Because
True.
managing two code bases just literally doubles your work, and
Okay.
it can also double the time that it takes for you to iterate. And iteration is key in these kind of early stage when you're trying to find that market fit and implement feedback.
So
So
when I think about and again, you had the design eye. I don't, right? I don't have a design eye. I mean, I've looked at your app. I've messed with it. It's beautiful. It's intuitive. It's you're iterating constantly.
appreciate it.
I couldn't do that. I'm one of those guys that is
Good.
like, I'll sell it, but I don't know if I am dealing with a third party,
Yeah.
where am I going to get myself up to speed about how to communicate? What tool do I need to learn, or what can I use that's available today that can help me communicate with a technical team? Because I think that's where the big disconnect is. If you've got a really good, ambitious, visionary founder, but he doesn't necessarily have an eye for design, should he find a design friend? Is it better to get a co-founder that's a marketer design? Like, where is the what is the best strategy to get a product or an MVP to market that is an app
Hmm.
without having the design eye and the technical abilities and knowing any of these swifts and terms and whatever
Yeah.
stuff you just said? Because I just want to go and sell it, right? Tell me about
Yeah.
that. What do you think?
Sure. So I'll first say anyone can learn design. It is
Mm-hmm.
something you can. When I went into it, I knew that things would kind of look off, but I didn't know
Okay.
why.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a few months of just like looking at apps that I love, and or like Airbnb is a great example, and seeing like why do I like this? Like what makes this work well? Like what's going on with the
Mm-hmm.
padding? Just like what's the why for everything? And yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
always asking why, and it's like a little
Yeah,
toddler.
I'm writing that down. You're
Yeah,
asking a lot of why am I wasting my time? Why am I spending
I
time on
love
this?
whys, because once you
Yes.
understand the whys, you understand how things work, and then like
Yes.
it's just a phenomenal quick question. And so I was asking
Yeah.
myself, why do I like this? Or if I go to app that sucks, I'm like, why does this suck? And like why
Yeah.
is it not working? So
Yeah.
I'll say it's doable to learn, and all you need is just I say just time, but like it's more of like concentrated time to really dissect. And I'm not gonna say take some courses. I don't know any courses. I didn't take any design app courses. I just have my phone and I have apps on it that I love to use. And I'm thinking, why do I love to use this? And then then you just find patterns, and eventually you do that enough times. Like any AI system, you iterate it, or machine learning, you do it enough times, then it starts looking good.
Right,
But
right.
if
So
you
learn
don't
from the
have,
apps.
yes, so but if you don't have that draw to figure out the why, or you don't have the time, and you are just like, let me suss, let me communicate to a tech team,
Yeah.
I would say be careful bringing on co-founders for the design. There are so many other avenues that you can take and provide. And co-founder is such a strong triggered word to
Mm-hmm.
bring somebody on with. And there's so many resources, affordable resources, as far as like Upwork or Dribble or these other avenues that you can find these designers who can pretty much bring you to where you're ready to then either develop it yourself or bring on a co-founder that's a developer. I think would be much more
Mm. Much
useful.
more valuable, yes. Somebody
Yeah,
that knows the technical element rather than the design element. So
exactly.
you're talking about an Upwork and all those things. I don't know everybody knows about them, but you're talking about just fractionalized resources to get you from point A to point B in the early stages.
Yes.
Wireframing, get some early versions of
Hmm.
how it could look some way somehow through some of these fractionalized resources, and then from there that could attract a potential technical co-founder, et cetera,
Yep.
et cetera. And again, there are many sources, to find co-founders today, from
Yeah.
LinkedIn to just whatever. But your recommendation is that's what you would have done had you, in hindsight, you would have
Hmm.
would have gone that route if you didn't have
Yeah.
the design eye or whatever.
Yeah. In hindsight, if I didn't want to pursue figuring out the why of design, that's
Yes,
the route I would definitely recommend
got it.
going.
Hmm.
Um, another key point that I really want to iterate is you as the founding team, whoever that is,
Hmm.
need to be able to iterate on your product as the founding team. So what I mean by that is if you're whatever you're building, it could be an e-com store, it could be a landscape business, whatever it is, your founding team needs to be able to iterate on that product or whatever it is you're building. So if it's an app, for example, you really should have a developer or deep pockets that can pay for an agency to make these iterations, because you're not going to get it right the first time. The first launch, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn how
Hmm.
much your assumptions sucked, and you're going to learn that, okay, I spent a lot of time with this agency. If you say you hired an agency, for example, we spent a lot of time and money building this thing up, and now users don't like it this way. So now I need to pay the agency again to now iterate on it. So if you're going to keep iterating on a platform, which chances are, if you're an app, you will be,
Hmm.
then you either need deep pockets or your technical co-founder needs to be able to be incentivized enough to keep making those iterations. Or you teach yourself, which is the route I went, which
Yes,
is
which is
also
what we're going to talk
subcontinent.
about next.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
which is what we're going to talk
But
about next. Yeah.
but as a
And
core
that's yeah.
team, do it. It has to be.
Yeah.
It has to be you guys.
No, that's good, and it makes a lot of sense. Know change is coming. Know that you're going to have to iterate,
Hmm.
and understand that perfect is the enemy of good. Get something going, because the best feedback you're going to get is from the feedback from the outside. This is the kind of iterative process, and because of that, if you plan all your ducks into this one launch basket and you don't have enough to get you there, then that's kind of making it a race, not a marathon, and you'll never finish,
Exactly.
because you're going to get trapped at this mile marker, and you're not going to have enough juice to get there.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
launch is just one point of your journey. You
the
launch and you're
beginning.
done. It
Yeah,
is
no,
just
it's
it
the
literally
beginning.
just
It's the
started.
big. That's
Yeah,
this literally the beginning, which is what's crazy about business, because you feel like you've done so much, and getting back to the year and a half that you've spent. Before we talk before we talk pragmatically about it, let's talk a little bit of the mental, philosophical components, right?
sure.
Where was your head? So you're a year and a half in, you've burned through all this cash, it didn't work. Why are you not banging on Deloitte's big, massive door going, please, I'm sorry, take me back?
Yeah.
What, tell me about that period for you, and how you bounced back, and was the value of your time still,
Dude,
how did
yeah.
you fight through that? Because that is some discouraging ass ish right there. That is a
Dude,
killer of dreams.
it's so tough. I mean, it was such a roller coaster. So I'm about a year into this terrible experience with the development firm,
Hmm.
and I post on LinkedIn saying like thank you to my old employers, but I'm quitting my job to go pursue Puppi.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit more lengthy and drawn out, but essentially it was like a thank you note, and I'm moving on to the next thing. Well,
Yep.
so here I am, no product yet. I'm going through, I'm burning money. I'm a year in. It's a long time to be like
That's a long
struggling
time.
through this. And my post goes viral. And now here I am on LinkedIn. At the time, I was literally at Rollins College in Orlando, Florida, on a Kai-side couch with my brother as this post is going viral. And here I am, like bumming it, figuring it out. And I have almost a million people have viewed this post. I have people all over the world asking me for jobs, and I'm like, I have nowhere to direct this traffic. But but it felt so good to have that affirmation of like, we support you, we're here. Like, wait, it sounds like what you're doing with Puppy is amazing. But then after like the euphoria and reaching out to everybody, thanking them individually and going through that
Yeah.
process, then reality set in probably a week later of like, oh, I still have no product. I still have nothing to direct them to. So
Yep.
yeah, that was really cool. Yeah, like the high was really high, but then the low like hit really hard. And I think
Oh
that
yeah.
that was kind of the beginning of the end, knowing that okay, something has to change with this, with getting Puppy out there and ready, and if not, I'll have to move on, which would just crush me. But within those next 6 months, something that I fell in love with, like just, and this only really happened because my development team sucked. If they were good, this wouldn't have happened. But because I kept getting sent these really bad designs and these terrible products of like what Puppy was,
Yeah.
I was like, why is this so hard? Why is it so hard for them to understand what we're trying to build here? And why are there so many bugs? Why does this not look good? Again, why? But then I fell in love with, okay, well, why is this so difficult? And then I started teaching myself everything about design. I started learning like, why do I like these apps? What are some like good like frameworks to build on? I started getting attached to the idea that to build a product like this, I call it a triangle. And it's a triangle between art, technology, and business. And I was like, you got the
Yep.
art, which is like the UI, it's like what you see on the screen. It's the technology that makes the screen, that makes
Mm-hmm.
it happen. And then there's the
Mm-hmm.
business side that like what's the value you're bringing, and eventually like how are you going to or not, how are you going to spend your money, or how are you going to make money. And that's kind of how I just fell in love with that triangle. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
this is really cool. And so when we started winding things down with the development firm and Puppi and the first iteration of Puppi, then I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to learn everything I can about this, and I want to get really good at it, because I never again do I want to be in a situation where I'm dependent on somebody else like this for my own success. So it was like the stubborn side of me that got me to learn everything about UI, UX, and development. Everything, to try to everything, all the different frameworks out there, like what to go. And there's so much advice there, and a lot of it's right, but like right for these own certain reasons. So trying to swim through all of that muck. And so what I started doing, I started selling website clients. I started selling to people like, hey, I'll build your website for you. And they'd be like,
Uh-huh.
oh, can you do this, this, and this? And I'd say, sure, I'll make it for you. I'll make it look awesome. And then I'd hang up the Zoom
Yeah.
call and be like, I have no idea how to build this. I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And but they'd send the check, and I'm like, okay, I just gotta figure it out.
Yeah.
And I was kind of light that fire under me, and then do a lot of really late nights, which I know you've seen a few of those, that kind of
Yeah. No,
mentality.
definitely. Way too late for
And
me at this point.
yeah, yeah. And I would start building these websites that would like look really good for people, and they were like really happy. And then I kind of started this agency that was like a small boutique, but it was like more meant for me to like get paid to learn.
Yeah,
So
that's what I
I
was gonna
was
say. It's a get paid
yeah,
to learn kind of strategy, which is really cool because you kept your main vision. You were trying to make back some money, and you were looking to learn, get paid to learn, and at the same time you were developing the skill set that you needed for Puppi, which you couldn't have known you were doing, or did you plan it that way? Because I don't know, was it that serendipitous? I mean, what where was your
it
head at
was
there?
yeah. Like, even when Puppy V1 was shut down, I always knew like if somebody else didn't come out with this in a way that I was
Mm-hmm.
satisfied with it, I was gonna do it regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Did I think it was gonna be me the one designing and developing it? I didn't have that kind of foresight. I didn't think I was gonna
Mm-hmm.
be that good at it, because also that's a huge undertaking for like a single person to do. But
Mm-hmm.
I just genuinely fell in love with the process of someone tells you an idea, you go through, you nerd out about all the benefits of it, all the features, then you design it, and then you can develop it, and you have people using it and testing it. And
Yeah.
I just love that process. That enough times, clients who thankfully were understanding in the beginning. I purposely picked clients from industries that weren't that tech savvy, so their
Yeah.
expectations weren't that high.
Yeah.
Specifically in like travel industry, was like their websites are terrible. So like even if like
Mm-hmm.
a bad site, it's relatively low risk, but then I just kind of kept improving from there.
Yeah.
And after doing that for, oh my gosh, probably another 8 months, 12 months, 8 months to a year, then I realized, oh, I have all the skills now to build Puppy.
Oh wow, I didn't even
That's
know
kind of
this.
cool.
That's crazy. So
Yeah,
so when Puppy V1 went sunset,
yeah,
you just pivoted to an agency as like a Hail Mary, because really, even though Deloitte was like, yeah, come on back, the damage was done. I mean, everybody already knew that you were going down this path of entrepreneurship, and that you were going down this path of building a product. So you couldn't really go back. You had to make work what you made work. but you didn't have a plan to restart Puppi when you started the agency. This was just a pivot so that you can survive. Am I or was there always a little light bulb going, well, like, I'm always going to do it at some point and this is my path? But it seems like it wasn't. It seems like you were just trying to start an agency and see where that took you.
Yeah. So I always knew, like when Puppi V1 took the sunset, took the L on that one, I
Yeah.
knew, I was like, this is such a fun idea. Like I couldn't imagine running a more fun company and like
Yeah.
providing them like the most value to like the people around me, and like hanging out with dogs and dog people sounds like the best job ever. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, I think there was always that aspect that I knew deep in my soul. I was like, this has got to come back. But what got me moving on, actually, what got me not to go back to Deloitte was, if I was to accept that kind of corporate job again, it's like it felt like I was quitting. It felt like I was gonna.
Mm.
That was it. Okay, you got me for the next whatever years, or I'm like conceding in a way. And I was like, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
concede yet. There's no
Right.
shot. There's no way you can get me to concede yet.
Yeah.
And I think I also got lucky that I just genuinely loved the process of building these apps and websites.
Mm-hmm.
There was just always something new. Every client that came through was different. So whatever industry they're a part of, I had to become a master at that industry. If it's travel, I can tell you all about IATA numbers and reservations and luxury travel and whatnot. And or if it's luxury siding for buildings, I can tell you all about Alucobon and all these different sidings now. And just it was always different. So I loved that like that forever learning aspect
Mm.
of it.
Yep.
And then just through doing enough of those, that's kind of when at some point I had the epiphany. I was like, wait a second, I can definitely do this now. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where Puppi V2 got started.
Mm-hmm.
Um, was after just doing it enough times, I realized that, wait a second, like, okay, this can happen. And now I don't need to hire an agency anymore. I can kind of control my own destiny. And now this time it's complete full ownership also, because if I'm going to be doing all the UI, all the UX, all the development, like if it fails, there's no one but me. Like that's just a part of the ownership aspect of it. And like
Mm-hmm.
you can't say the development team did a terrible job. So there is definitely a portion of I I had to really own that. Okay, like this is it. Like V2, it's make or break on Puppi. And
Mm-hmm.
if it doesn't work, it's not meant to happen. But I'm very happy with where it is right now, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited to see where it's going to go and get this thing launched. It's a huge undertaking for a solo person to do
Absolutely.
all the UI, UX, and dev, but it's kind of where my journey's taken me.
Yeah, and as we think about your, and we look at the process, and I look at you as, from when I've met you to now and how much you've iterated and how much you've changed, it really feels like the investment of time in learning a tool like Bubble, for example, really
Mhm.
has an insane value, because this additional skill that you're developing and at the same time pursuing your own app or product, you're really getting two really important skills that
Yeah,
I think most people don't really want to spend the time to do, but should. Um, would you say that over a co-founder, it if you're building an app the way that you've done it through Bubble, does it make sense to find a co-founder? Does it make sense to sort of try the journey as a solopreneur? Talk a little bit about that, because we haven't really talked about selecting the right co-founder. We talked about
mhm,
maybe somebody that's a developer and like iteration, but when it's you doing all of it, who do you incorporate? How do you stay sane working on your own thing by yourself?
yeah,
Who do you bounce ideas off of? Let's talk a little bit about that iterative process, because I think we're getting to the point of what's current for you, and I want to talk
yeah.
about how far you've gotten, but we're really close. And tell me a little bit about that, how you developed your ideas, what you feel about co-founders, and how to incorporate the right one, and of course how you see that value of developing or learning a development tool like a no-code tool like Bubble.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with the co-founder and then go into Bubble.
Yeah.
So when finding a co-founder, and I could say anecdotally through my own self and my experiences, only bring on a co-founder if they genuinely bring in skill sets and values that you yourself do not possess and are not
Mm-hmm.
willing to invest that time to invest.
Mm-hmm.
And we are currently in a time now where you have these low no code tools that make it so that if you are a very talented designer, it's not that difficult now to go into Bubble with the design knowledge and build a functioning app. I mean, it'll take some time to also be a developer, but the barrier to entry to create an app is so much lower nowadays. And
Mm-hmm.
I know we're talking about a lot about Bubble, but for those that are listening, it's because I built Puppi on Bubble,
Right.
and it has the Bubble is pretty much a surface level SaaS software that allows you to do pretty much any workflow that you would need an app to do in like a
Mm-hmm.
no code manner. You can add your own custom code in if you want, but I mean, the feature base in Bubble is so vast, and the database is all on AWS. So scalability is not an issue as long as you know how to structure a database responsibly and well. It can scale, sky's the limit.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these low code softwares are being kind of not shut down, but people disregard them or they're taboo against them because, oh, they're only good for MVPs. And for
Mm-hmm.
some, that might be true. But when the underlying engine is built efficiently enough and then it's hosted on AWS, there's really what's your issue? What's your issue for scale there? That
Mm-hmm.
is pretty much Bubble is just translating all of that, all those block workflows into JavaScript for you, and then
Yeah.
they have these like great wrappers that you can put native functionality into, and next thing you know, it's on the App Store and it looks no different than any app that you are used to using.
Mm-hmm.
So, at what point does it really matter?
Right.
Um, Now, that all being said, finding a technical co-founder or finding so in at first I thought finding a technical co-founder was necessary because I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
develop. And then I got into the Bubble world and was able to then develop for myself. So then it kind of nixed the need of having that co-founder. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I found in a system like Bubble and also these low code tools, I believe in general, they also agree that collaborators are nice, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's really easy to clash heads. And I don't think this is any different than normal development either. But because
Mm-hmm.
iterations and the change are so quick in these kind of bubble atmospheres and these bubble projects, it's really, I found it really difficult to work in a project with one other person as things are, as you're forcing other people to upload their changes. I'm sure there are processes that I can follow that would make that easier.
Mm-hmm.
But just in my experience for now, I'm much quicker as a solo founder to work in a bubble atmosphere than not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, another, besides the skill sets, another area where a founder might help is if they're providing substantial financing. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if they don't have the skills to do it, but if they can pay for the skills, then that's great too. But though you just need
Mm-hmm.
some deep pockets to have that kind of co-founder.
Right.
At that
Right.
at what point are they just an investor?
Right.
But sometimes
Right.
it might be what you need.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Uh, so, was there another question that you want me to touch on?
No, no, I think that helps. I think a lot of the listeners and even myself to when I think about building, I always think, oh, you need another person, you want to, collaborate. But I mean, you're walking around with your phone, showing it off to your potential users, and they're giving you way better feedback than somebody who's in the in would.
Yeah.
And I think that what we're really seeing is if you take the time to learn the tool and learn to build on it, you can move and iterate a lot faster. And what you're really saying here is, again, the value of the time. What is
Mm-hmm.
that value? Why am I bringing on a co-founder if I am? And is that why strong enough to take me through to the very end? And I think that most people who bring on founders or co-founders, like you said, it's such a strong thing. It's such an important part of the business. If they're not part of that iterative process, if you don't have a longevity game plan with them, if you don't see their value or you don't establish their long-term value, you're going to run into a uselessness of that relationship later, potentially, or there might be a throttling effect where you're not moving as quickly as you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really important thing to service is like, listen, if you're watching this and you're a solo founder looking to get an app off the ground, here is Dillon sitting here who has done the agency, who has gone through the steps, who has learned the things. And now, how long is now? It's about a year of, how long have you been iterating now?
About a year of development.
About a year of development now, has a full-fledged, basically ready to launch application. So as we get to the final minutes of this,
Sure.
we get to the fun part of talking a little bit about, what you've gotten so far with the app. Talk a little bit about the features. Tell me. I mean, when are we launching? What's going on? Tell us about the
Yeah.
good stuff. Yeah, tell us about the fun stuff.
So right now, it's really exciting to be in the final QA points. I mean,
Yeah.
at this point, it's just making sure notifications fire at the right time. I mean, like I take dog ownership and just dogs so seriously because we treat them as our kids. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, like say messaging, for example, like you're able to, as the dog owner, if you create your dog's Q profile and then you're able to seamlessly just post a play date to the public feed, and then people can go reach out to you to pick up those play dates.
Mm-hmm.
And in those conversations back and forth, like notifications are super important. They're also a nightmare to like manage on like the development side. All the different types of notifications, the messages, especially whenever you go into like the play dates and like if you have your play date page and being proactive and saying, hey, your play date starts in like an hour. Like, are you ready to to meet Buddy at the pickup location, or like all that kind of stuff? Like having that kind of foresight for that user experience is
Wow.
a tremendous amount of work. And then managing some of the outlier scenarios too, which is just like crazy. So imagine like you invite somebody to a play date, but then you cancel it, or like the busy dates. So if you have multiple dogs like yourself, and then managing like creating play dates for like one of them or both of them. So just having that kind of flexibility so that people can really make Puppy their own.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really cool and exciting, and I can't wait to share it with everybody and also to have it on the app stores too. Also working in conjunction with Bubble to get it as their showcase app, which is like super
Yes.
exciting.
That's
Um,
like, whoa, holy moly. Yeah. I mean, that's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. I just spoke with one of the business admins over there on last week, and yeah, so that's really going to be exciting. And they have like 2.5 million people that are building apps on Bubble. So to have Puppy as like their showcase app is it would be just it'd be absolutely great, like mind blowing. Like to think
Yeah.
it's uh, a thing is absolutely nuts. But at the same time, like I don't. You've seen how much time I put into it too, so I'm also like
Yeah.
not that surprised. I'm very happy about it, but I sacrifice a
Oh,
lot to
yeah.
kind of get to this point.
Yes, you
Um,
did. So much
yeah,
sacrifice. And you really
yeah,
took the product to much later than most would. And you have a philosophy around this, and I want you
yeah,
to
yeah.
talk about it.
Sure.
And when we first talked, you said you're not an MVP launcher kind of guy. You really want to get through. You've built a full-fledged mobile application, and you've thought about. I mean, I picked your brain for about an hour trying to catch something off, but you've had every notification covered, every segue, every button, everything had a thing. And
Yeah.
even then, you were making iterations and changes. Why did you decide to go that way versus what we talked about earlier, where you're kind of launching and then iterating? Because you're
Yeah.
launching you're launching something now that's really been through its own iteration and testing and things.
Hmm.
Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So a saying I love is to simplify is complicated, to complicate is simple. And a lot of those iterations you bring up is me slashing, is me just like making it as refined as possible. So there's few things as possible on the screen that get you to your end goal. So when you open Puppy, if you're a dog owner or if you're like a dog lover or a borrower, like giving you that experience that's right for you, um, every time. And that's the most difficult part. That's like what you open up Airbnb and it's like the only thing you see is like a search bar at the top. You see a few categories and a build like a picture of like a listing. And there's this giant app behind it. But when you splash
Mm,
there, you don't see much. So it takes a lot of time and effort to articulate a simple looking app, but still have that breadth of functionality. So so that's what you see me iterating on all the time, is really just refining that user experience so that it works well and
mm-hmm,
that people know how to use it. So it's intuitive, so it feels familiar. That's the hard
mm-hmm,
part, especially for like a
mm-hmm.
novel concept like Puppy. Um, Creating something that feels familiar so people kind of instinctively like, oh, that makes sense because I've used apps before that feel the same way. So you're not
Yeah,
really trying to teach them something new.
yeah,
I
yeah,
always say
yeah,
like get inspiration from these billion-dollar apps that offer free products because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Chances are you'll have features that overlap. So segueing now into my theory of development in the near future, essentially is MVPs are dead.
yeah. Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so what I mean by MVPs are dead, it's a harsh statement, but essentially what's under that is you have these platforms like Bubble now, where it allows somebody like me who's insane enough to spend the time to do it to be able to build a platform that would usually take a team of like 5 to 10 people. So, and if I restricted the features, I would have been able to build this thing in easily 4 months max. So, because the barrier to entry to develop is becoming so much lower, and user expectations for these apps are so high nowadays. Like, remember back in the day when Facebook first started and it was like just this like archaic feed of just like posts and maybe pictures, and like our expectations for it were like so low.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays we've had over a decade of these billion-dollar companies giving us these beautiful free app experiences. So if you come into the market now as an app and you're not at least close to matching that to at least like a 90% effectiveness, people are going to feel like something's off, it's wrong, and they're probably going to bounce to another service that makes them feel like what they're expecting. Like you really,
Mm-hmm.
the expectations are so much higher nowadays. So by
Mm-hmm.
blending these high user expectations to the lower barrier to entry for people to build products, and now also with the consolidation of tech talent and capital in these larger companies where it's really easy to copy things nowadays, to copy software. And I mean, you had Slack, and then Microsoft just quickly just spun up Teams, 90% as good as Slack, but good enough to kind of bundle it all together. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's really easy for these big companies with their tech talent to just kind of point the the giant Death Star beam at you, and then be like, "I'm gonna destroy that thing by making it."
Mm-hmm.
And so when you blend the low barrier to entry to tech, the high expectations of like what our customers think for apps, and the ability
Mm-hmm.
to have these large companies copy or squash you, if you are coming to the market with a new product and isn't that differentiating to either a current solution, or it is not refined enough to match users' expectations now, it's probably not going to
Mm.
go well for you.
Yeah,
So
very well put. And again, this is the hard truth that people I think who are thinking about building apps need to hear is that you got to spend, you almost have to, because I agree with you, you have to spend the time you did thinking through it because if you don't become a potential competitor, if you can't get the user to feel that they're dealing with the Airbnb version, whatever it is you're building right off the break, you're going to lose them. And then any competitor that sees that will potentially just take that concept, add the things you're missing, and screw you out of everything. And
yep,
I think with Puppi, when you look at the behemoth that it is in your essentially your MVP, it's what it takes today to say, hey, you can't just clone me. You can't just get in there. Like I think you have to build enough of a powerhouse to challenge the status quo so that these competitors who might be WAG or who might be whoever that may even
yeah,
think about incorporating a feature like this into their application will think twice because they're going to go, holy crap, well, we can't just do that because Puppy's got the market share. They're sticking. And
yeah.
we can't just take these users. There's not these mistakes. And so that being said, yes, I think you're right about the MVP being dead. Um,
And I'll preface to it, it's probably not dead yet. We probably got a few more years, but in general, as a concept, I think it's going to hold true, and we're going to see it more
yeah,
and more.
Yeah, and we talk about dead very, esoterically, right? Because I think that
Yeah,
there's certain applications, but when we specifically talk about like user-based mobile applications, I think like the MVP is dying very rapidly with the insane launch of the no code with the low barrier to entry. But I think you still got to be crazy to do what you did. And I think this is why I
oh
love
yeah,
this to be the first episode
yeah.
because I don't recommend anybody do what Dillon did because it is
Don't do it.
completely insane.
It's
But
yeah, don't. I wouldn't recommend my kid
I
doing it if I.
wouldn't right.
Yeah,
But we do want to leave our viewers with a few words that if they did want to pursue this, if anybody's watching this that's stuck or thinking about this or is looking at the current job and going, I'm in the same place and my time is more valuable than this. And I don't want to get stuck, with the BS. Leave us with some parting words. What would you say to someone? What would you say to yourself in those periods of time? How can we empower the current and future founders
yeah, sure.
during their
So
dark times? Yeah.
yeah, find community. Find people who are just as crazy as you, either
Mm,
through passions in entrepreneurship, through tech, through whatever it is you're passionate about. Find similar people that are like minded that you can nerd out with, because
mm,
you aren't going to be able to find, you just like talking to the person randomly next to you and have those similar interests. And this route can be very isolating and lonely. So know
mm.
that going in, but it doesn't have to be if you have the right community of crazy people that you surround yourself with. That if I can talk to myself years ago, I'd say find a group of people equally as crazy as you to at least join you on this journey. And if you have that community of people that you can bounce ideas off of, you can struggle with, share your wins. I mean, it's a thing too. Like you have wins and like you tell your friends and they think you're bragging, but you've just been working on this thing for the past year and you're proud of it. It's not really a
Yeah.
brag. It's just like a feeling of accomplishment. So finding people that understand that and don't see
Yes.
so that's something that it's not that hard nowadays. I mean, you can go on LinkedIn
Mhm.
or any of these platforms, find a Discord channel. There are people out there who are just as crazy as you are. So
Yeah.
find those people, and it'll make your journey so much easier.
I can't I love that so much because I think that so many people have this solopreneur mentality and community is everything. You know, in our area, we've got the 1909 community, we've got Pivotal Founders, we've got all of the co-working spaces, we've got the Florida Tech Hub. There's just so many places where you can turn now, but you have to, because you, once you change your mentality and become this insane person who wants to pursue something they feel is really worth their time, you can no longer relate really with the other folks who are not, because anything you say, it's impossible really to do.
Everything you
Maybe
say sounds
family.
crazy.
Yeah, because you're like, yeah, I'm just going to spend 17 hours. And yeah, I went to bed at 2 a.m. and then I woke up at 6 and now I'm in great. And they're like, yo, you're out of your mind. What are you doing? What do you know? And sometimes that's what it takes. And it takes a little crazy. And it's not like we're talking about hustle or grind culture here. We're not really talking about that. We're just talking about pure effort that it takes if you really want to do it yourself. And you have what people typically have is limited resources, limited time. And sometimes no matter what where you are in life, you got to take the plunge, carve out the time, carve out the effort, bring yourself into the community to reinforce it, so that when you're in the low, they lift you up, because that's the only way. Because sometimes the product ain't going to do it. The people around you are going to, it's the community. I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Paul.
Dillon,
Thank you.
awesome podcast. Thank you so much for joining. Dillon Schade, Puppi. Look at it. Wait, when is it going to be in the App Store?
Give it a month or two. To get approved.
Month or two in the App Store. Cannot wait.
Now we own Puppi.com, which is really cool. I'm really excited about that too.
Ooh,
so.
Puppi.com.
Yeah.
Just wow. So that whole website just for a download link for the app. I love it. Let's go.
Yeah.
Perfect. I can't wait. Thank you so much. And if you want to get in touch with Dillon Schade, you can hit him up on LinkedIn. Also, pivotalfounders.com. He is a member in the community. So if you join, you can hit him up directly and pick his brain. Again, Dillon, thank you so much. This has been awesome, man.
Paul, thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Hell yeah, man. All right.